What's up, guys, and welcome back to Wake Up Entertainment. So, if you have seen maybe in movies or maybe on news on the TV, there is that yellow tape that surrounds a crime scene that is called condoning off the crime scene. And what the police will be doing is to preserve the evidence that will be inside that crime scene. And on top of that, the police also guards that crime scene to make sure that nobody enters inside.
Can you tell us what is the importance of cordoning off the crime scene, and also what is the importance of guarding the crime scene by the members of the SAPS?
The reason for cordoning the crime scene is to guard the crime scene or to prevent movement into your crime scene. And guarding the scene is to ensure that the people don't just enter the crime scene without any reasons.
The evidence that took place before you arrived, it's that on the crime scene where this exhibit mentioned in paragraph 9 in your report, when Sergeant Mosia from the LCRC Springs arrived at the crime scene, he inspected the crime scene. He did not find the bullet on top of the cupboard, and he left the crime scene. There is evidence that there are people who accessed the crime scene, including members of the SAPS, and only on the following day that this exhibit was recovered on top of the cupboard, which raises some concern.
Constable Musia did not find the bullet. He said he realized that the scene is of such a magnitude that he needs help, and that he then summoned the necessary help.
Can I rephrase, my lord? The exhibit was not recovered at the first time when the first police attended the crime scene. I was singling out Sergeant Mosia because it's the one from the LCRC. That bullet was not recovered when the first police entered the crime scene and inspected the exhibit. It was not recovered, but it was only recovered on the following day, after the scene had been accessed by members of the public and the police officers.
So the question that has been posed by Advocate Mshololo, it is that Sergeant Thabo Mosia was the first forensic investigator to actually arrive at the Khumalo house, and he actually entered inside and checked for any evidence that he could find, but he did not discover any bullet projectile in his first investigation, and he was the first to actually arrive at that scene. But the challenge now is that this bullet projectile was then found later by another police officer. This actually occurred a day later on. So the point of contention that is being brought forward by Advocate Mshololo, even though she did not make it clear, it is that somebody actually put that bullet projectile a day later, because the first investigator, Thabo Mosia, actually had not found that bullet projectile. So what is occurring here? It is a sequence of evidence collection. There is something that is called initial observation versus something called later discovery. So initial observation by Sergeant Mosia, he did not locate that bullet projectile at the scene, but it was then discovered later on by another police officer. So the challenge now is that this discrepancy between the initial observation and later discovery, it is raising questions about whether the bullet projectile itself was actually present at the time when Thabo Mosia actually made his first initial assessment of the scene itself. So what this later discovery is doing is that it is fueling suspicions of potential tampering by somebody then just sort of like planting a bullet projectile inside the Khumalo house. So what is happening is that this bullet projectile, it was like later documented into the evidence register, and it actually suggested that the process of collecting this evidence occurred after the first initial investigation. So with the way that this situation or this matter is actually being handled in court, it seems that it's actually the defense that has to prove that the bullet itself was actually planted. So let's look at ways in how the defense can actually prove this or go about it. What the defense can actually do is to examine the chain of custody. That is first by looking at the documentation and scrutinize the records showing how the bullet itself was actually handled. So if there are gaps in the documentation or any irregularities, it can actually suggest that the evidence itself was actually compromised. So another way that the defense can actually prove whether this bullet projectile was planted or not, it is to conduct a forensic analysis on the bullet itself and compare the markings with those typically found on crime scenes or suspected weapons. So if there are inconsistencies with this crime scene evidence, then it would actually support the theory that the bullet itself was actually planted. And they can also even analyze the physical condition of the bullet, such as whether like residue, wear, to actually match what is actually expected to have been at the crime scene at the time of that incident inside the Khumalo house. But however, looking at like historical cases, it is actually possible for evidence to be found later on at a crime scene. Well, this is possible because crime scenes themselves, they're actually complex, and investigators might miss evidence due to poor lighting or clutter, or maybe focus on another area and missing other areas. It's actually very possible. And it's also possible for evidence to be hidden under certain compartments. So to actually expect investigators to find all the evidence in just one day, it can actually be not fair to the investigators themselves. Because in this case, it was actually Tabo Mosia just by himself who arrived and did the task of condoning off the crime scene, then collecting whatever evidence he could find inside the Khumalo house. So this is the challenge that is there. The defense is challenging the presence of this bullet projectile being found a day later, but at the same time, we cannot expect the first investigator to find all the evidence at once. So what really matters is whether this later discovery is actually reasonable and follows proper forensic procedures or not, which then brings in the challenge which occurred at the Khumalo house, that people actually entered inside the house. So it now makes it very, very difficult for the state to simply rely with later discovery only, because the crime scene itself, it wasn't properly condoned off, which is why the defense is raising all of these suspicions. So this is the situation that is on the ground. And the final question is now, how should the judge handle this? Because the final answer now has to come from the judge. The police, they sort of like failed in doing their duty. And unfortunately, it's not like the problem of the state, but as the prosecution is what they are dealing with. And obviously they are arguing for later discovery, and the defense is pointing at those lapses and poking holes on that. In this case, if I'm to give my judgment, I would disregard this bullet projectile just on the basis of preventing injustice, if I'm the judge and if I'm ruling all over this, because we already have evidence that people entered inside that house. So I would definitely disregard this bullet projectile to prevent a mistrial or injustice to the accused. Because the thing is that there is like other evidences that the state can actually present and rely on. That would be much, much better. And I think it would be fair to everyone. The state will have to prove those phone call cases, the money bag, and also the issue of the confessions. Then this bullet projectile will then come on top as like corroborating evidence, but not like as the main thing. At least that's how I'm going to like view all of this. So tell me what you think in the comment section, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.